Alright, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to be talking about today is patterns of inheritance. And the question is, what does inheritance mean? It means to receive something from somebody, to get something. And in this case, we're talking about genetics, genes. To get genes from your parents and to give genes to your kids. And in order to talk about that, we need to use a really cool tool called Punnett Squares. And what a Punnett Square is a tool we use to take an educated guess. Now, it's not going to tell us what genes you definitely got from your parents or what genes you are definitely going to pass on to your kids. It's going to allow us to take a good guess at which genes you might pass on to your kids. But in order to do that, we need to talk about a few key words, a few key phrases to understand stuff. Our first pair of words is genotypes and phenotypes, and the definition of these words are actually in the words themselves. Genotype is the gene, the genetic code. Basically means, what does this gene look like? Everyone's DNA is made up of A's, T's, C's, and G's. You remember that from previous chapters. But your genotype is going to include the A's, T's, C's, and G's that you got from your mom and the ones you got from your dad. Your genotype is a mix of both of your parents together. Where phenotype is the actual physical trait. What do you physically look like? Even though you get two alleles, which is just a fancy word for gene, in each genotype, you only get one phenotype. The genotype tells the phenotype what to look like. Sometimes only one allele is actually being used. Other times they blend. The example of skin color shown here is grossly oversimplified. Skin tone is actually a polygenic trait, which means you can have a genotype on one part of your DNA that says for you to have dark skin, but that you have another genotype on a different part of your DNA that says for you to have light skin. These two genotypes can blend together and tell you to have a shade in between, some kind of tan. We'll discuss polygenic traits in a different video, so for now let's move on to our next bit of terminology. As I said before, allele is just a fancy word for genes, but it's a bit more to it than that. Alleles are homologous genes, which means you get one from mom, you get one from dad, and they're both coding for the same part of your body. Problem is, they probably just don't agree with each other very well. So it means we're going to have to talk about which one is your body going to listen to. Dominant alleles, or dominant traits, are ones that will express on your body, where recessive alleles are ones that don't want to express. They can express if they're the only ones there. But remember, there are two alleles in each genotype, one from mom, one from dad. If mom's allele is recessive, but dad's is dominant, the dominant one will express itself in the phenotype, which means show itself on your body. However, if they're both recessive, then there is no choice. You will express that recessive trait. Let's take a look at my diagram. In this oversimplified example, the alleles are being written as D's because it's easier than writing out the whole code. And the letter D was chosen because darker skin tones are dominant over lighter skin tones. Mom has two alleles, but as we learned in the last chapter, she will separate them into different gametes, or eggs. Dad will separate his into different gametes, in this case sperm. We don't know which sperm will be used to fertilize which egg, which gives us a variety of possible outcomes. If mom and dad both pass on recessive alleles, the child will show the lighter recessive phenotype. But if dad were to pass on the dominant allele, then the child will show the dominant phenotype. Even though mom gave the recessive, the dominant allele will always express itself. So, just a quick refresher. Genotypes are now going to be written as letters. I don't care which letter you use, just pick one that makes sense to you. And dominants are going to be shown as capital letters, recessives are going to be shown as lowercase letters. So for example, eye color. I'm choosing the letter B because brown is dominant, and blue, I'm choosing a lowercase b because it's recessive. If I were to get two dominant brown alleles, one from mom, one from dad, then that resulting child would have brown eyes. However, if one parent were to give a dominant brown and the other parent were to give the recessive blue, then that resulting offspring would still have brown eyes because brown is dominant. It doesn't matter that the blue allele is there because brown will win. But don't forget that the blue is still there, and this offspring can grow up and still pass that blue on to their child, even though they have brown eyes. If both parents gave a recessive blue, then that's the only way a child can be born with a recessive phenotype, showing blue on their face. Remember, blue is recessive. It doesn't actually want to be shown, and only does so if there's no dominance to show. This brings us to our next bit of terminology, homozygous and heterozygous. Homozygous are when the alleles are the same. Mom and dad both gave you the same allele. Or heterozygous is when mom and dad gave you two different alleles, in which case the dominant allele will show up on your body in the phenotype. Remember, in science, the prefix homo means same, and the prefix hetero means different. So if mom and dad both gave you big B, you are considered homozygous dominant. If they gave you little b, you are considered homozygous recessive. And if they gave you big B, you are considered heterozygous because big B is a dominant, little b is a recessive. You have two different alleles. And the dominant one is the one that's going to show up. So let's do another example, this time a little bit faster. Hair color. If dark hair is dominant and red hair is recessive, then homozygous dominant would give you dark hair. Heterozygous would give you dark hair because dominant wins, and recessive or homozygous recessive would give you red hair because it's recessive. So at this point you're probably asking yourself, how am I going to know which allele am I going to pass on to my kids? Well, the answer is you don't know. Complete 50-50 chance. You have no idea which of the two alleles you're going to pass on. However, we can take a guess. If you know what alleles you have and you know what alleles your partner has, then we can take a guess to figure out the possible outcomes, the possible offspring you could have with that partner. And the tool to use to do that is called a Punnett Square. Now this tool can't actually tell us for sure what the kid's going to have, but we can find out for sure what the kid's not going to have. If I know that I have hazel eyes and blue eye alleles, and my wife has blue eye and blue eye alleles, I know for certain that my kid will not end up with green eyes, because neither of those alleles will end up in the Punnett Square. So let's take a look at one of these tools and see if we can figure out a possible offspring. In this example, the father is homozygous recessive, has blue eyes, and the mother is heterozygous, has brown eyes. We want to know what's the chance the offspring will have brown eyes, and what are the chances the offspring will have blue eyes. A couple things to know about this Punnett Square is we're going to have 4 possible outcomes. That's the 4 squares you see. Each square represents a 25% chance. And another thing we need to understand is that mom and dad both have 2 alleles each. The offspring can only have 2. So out of the 4 alleles, we can only get 2 of them. Right? And we took care of that last chapter with meiosis. We made those meiosis projects where we separated out the genes or the chromosomes into different gametes. Same thing here. We're going to take mom's 2 alleles and separate them out, and dad's 2 alleles and separate them out. Dad's 2 alleles are going to be separated out across the top, and mom's 2 alleles are going to be separated across the side. And now easily, we're just going to drop dad's 2 recessive alleles all the way down, and we're going to spread mom's dominant allele all the way across, and we're going to do the same thing with mom's recessive allele all the way across. And what we end up with are 4 possible offspring. 4 possible genotypes that this offspring is going to have. There is a 25% chance for each square, and 2 of those squares are heterozygous and 2 of those squares are homozygous recessive, which gives us a 50% chance of the child having brown eyes and a 50% chance of this child having blue eyes. Let's try another example. This time the father's heterozygous and the mom is also heterozygous. So we put dad's alleles on top, mom's alleles on the side. We drop dad's alleles down and mom's alleles across, and the combinations that we get include 1 homozygous dominant, 2 heterozygous, and 1 homozygous recessive, which gives us 75% chance of the offspring having dark hair, because the homozygous dominant gives you dark hair, and the two heterozygous also give you dark hair, because the dark hair is dominant. That's 75%. And then 25% chance of having red hair, because only one of those squares ended up being homozygous recessive. Okay, one more. This time, the trait we're looking for is the recessive trait. So, dad is homozygous dominant and does not have it. Mom is homozygous recessive and does. And we put those together, you see we get 4 heterozygous, which means 0 chance of this kid having the trait, in this case freckles, because it's recessive. The only way to get recessive is to have 2 recessive alleles. That's a 100% chance that the child will not have freckles. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Punnett Squares. Now there will be more supplemental work posted on Google Classroom, but until then, please stay safe, stay healthy, avoid contact with other people, and if you do, please do not touch your face. Wash your hands. And I will see you when school starts back up again.